Let me get my cane out for you and pull up my rocking chair. I was fresh out of college, graduated in 1998, with a computer science degree. Within 9 months of landing my first job, I was retasked to assist with software review work. I worked at a consultancy and was staffed at Goldman Sachs, yes, that big financial firm. For 6 months, my sole job was to review database code for software that was actually relatively recently written. The software was responsible for tracking major mortgage deals. We're talking billions of dollars a year. My specific job was to look for all code that referred to or referenced dates. The data in the system came from dozens of data feeds with different time, date standards. My job was to look for Y2K bugs. Sounds easy, right? Nope. We're talking nearly 250,000 lines, 200K, 250K, of code. In order to do this work, and fix the bugs, of which there were many, I was only allowed to work on a air-gapped private network where all the machines had their clocks advanced artificially and running the latest OS/hardware patches to support 4-digit years. To get my code onto this network, I had to deliver to a special FTP site and wait 24 hours for Goldman Sachs to physically copy it over to the air-gapped network. Back then they literally did this by copying it onto floppy disks and transporting it from one set of machines to another. I could then run my system on the new network and execute tests. Most of my work, however, involved reading these 200,000 lines of code, line by line, checking for anything that did time, date manipulation. A lot of the code was Y2K ready or at least safe, but some of it wasn't. Back then Goldman had some really weird rules about software development. You were only allowed to use their code editors, which only support 80-character column widths, and it was all database, stored procedure code. PL/SQL for anyone who cares, Oracle 7. Needless to say, a lot of the fancy advances in IDEs we have today didn't exist for me then. To make matters worse, this air-gapped network at Goldman was only accessible to contractors like myself from special machines installed on top of file cabinet in their office in Manhattan, standing room only, not even a stool. And they were time-shared. There weren't enough for all the developers that needed to review code, and Goldman employees got priority. Contractors didn't have to go home at 5, but Goldman folks did. So I'd come in early to get a few hours before I got booted off to run tests on whatever got copied over the night before. Then I'd spend about 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. hand-reviewing code line by line on my laptop and preparing changes. Then from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. or so I'd do final tests on the day before's version, and by 10 p.m. or so have a new batch of changes to send over to the Goldman IT folks. I'd hoof it home, about 1 hour commute, get about 5-6 hours of sleep and repeat, Monday through Saturday. For about 6 months. It was by far the worst, most grueling, mind-numbing work I've ever done as a software professional. I found a lot of bugs, the type of bugs that would mistakenly think some mortgage deal had been around since Epoch, January 1, 1970, because it misread a timecode, or accidentally time advance it to something like 2099, or just reject some $300 million deal for failing data validation. These kinds of errors would have resulted in Goldman losing credibility in financial markets and would have resulted in chaos for tracking these massive mortgage deals. Even so, seems like small potatoes, but you can easily extrapolate it to the efforts everyone was doing to protect financial records. Goldman makes a lot of money off interest on these kinds of deals. I was fortunate, most of the software I was using was recently written and the devs had made some attempt to be aware of the issues, but mistakes were still made. There are Goldman devs I was time sharing with working on systems that were 20 years old that didn't have OS patches to make them compliant. They were furiously rewriting code and modernizing it. I'd leave at midnight and come in at 7 a.m. or so and see the same group of folks working for 3 or 4 days straight. Granted, it was usually contractors. Goldman employees were mostly managers, oversight, at least the ones I interacted with. Anyway, I'll put my cane down now. Blows my mind that this event is old enough that people don't even believe it really happened these days, or that it wasn't that big of a deal. It was a seminal moment for me and one hell of a learning experience in software dev. To set the time period for folks, this was just a few years before the World Trade Center collapsed. I went through it every day, took the PATH train from Exchange Place to WTC Station, and walked to Goldman's office past the NYSE etc. Loved that walk. Back then cell phones were still a luxury item. I think a year or two after this the Motorola StarTAC, first clamshell phone, became all the rage. Nokia was rocking the world with their phone designs. Xboxes didn't exist. EverQuest had just become a thing for PC gaming. Ruins of Kunark expansion had just launched. Hell, for that first year out of college I was still using dial-up modems for internet at home. Cable modems were just becoming a thing in Jersey City, NYC. The comm era was still expanding, the bubble hadn't burst yet. The guys in my apartment were super excited over our Sony Trinitron 32 inches nearly flat TV, still cathode ray tube. I forked out nearly $900 for a 21 inches CRT monitor that could do 1024 by 720 resolution. Pentium 2s were hot shit for gaming PCs. It was crazy times. When New Year's Eve, 1999 came around, I was on emergency speed dial if anything went wrong. When the ball dropped and my phone didn't ring and the world just went on as normal, I was barely aware that I had taken part in a historical moment likely to be forgotten as millions of developers around the world breathed a sigh of relief.